Hey y'all, welcome back to Unbounded, Unbothered, and our version of It's Not Just You, your burning question or answers to your most burning questions in the workplace. So today we're going to cover two questions. I was previously denied a raise due to budget issues. How do I know when to ask again? And why can't I speak up unless I'm 100% sure I know the answer? I love these two questions. We're going to dive in just a second. But first, I'm Gretchen DeKnikker, your host and the CEO and founder of Unbounded and Unbothered, which is career coaching for high achievers who feel stuck, stifled, or at a crossroads and don't want to feel that way anymore. We can do that. So the reason I put these together is I've spoken to almost 2,000 women now over the past year or so, and there's a common set of questions that come up. And the theme among those is also that we all think it's just us. We think we look around and we see everyone else and we think, oh, well, she's got it together and she's got it together, but I am uniquely messed up and don't know the answers to these questions. And so I really wanted to start this series to get it out there because there's kind of little buckets that these fall into, right? There's perfectionism and burnout, or setting and maintaining boundaries, finding and using your voice, and then how to get it all done and still have a life. Like, these are sort of the buckets that these questions go into. And so the goal is to just have candid answers to these questions. And what I love to do is break down, here's how your socialization as a woman and other marginalized identities that you live in, how that impacts and hits your nervous system and results in a predictable number of responses, right? We might go into negative self-talk or perfectionist overwork, or we'll spin in self-doubt and indecision, or we will people please and prioritize other people's needs, often to the detriment of our own. And so what I do in these sessions is really just break it down with each of these questions. Like, here's perhaps what's going on with your socialization. Here's how it's hitting your nervous system. Here's how you feel. And then here's the things that you're going to do that you don't really like the outcomes of when you do them, and here's how to change it. So that's kind of how we structure these. For those of you who are newer, I worked in tech for over 20 years, and in 2017 I burned out at the height of my career. I walked away from the pinnacle of my career because I just couldn't dig any deeper. And I left there and I started running an organization for women in tech. And that really fed my soul for a few years. And then COVID hit, and I decided it would be a brilliant idea for me to go back into an early stage startup where I'd spent most of my career. And that was a terrible idea, but I didn't know it at the time. And so I felt like I read all the books. I tried all the things, the meditating, the yoga, I even got certified as a yoga instructor, right? Like, all of these things to sort of manage it. And so I finally hired a coach because I believed that I needed to stay in this role for a year. Turns out I didn't, but I felt like that's what I needed to do. And what I learned was so profound and shifted so much of my relationship, not just with my career, but with myself and with the world around me, that I was like, this, if I had known this 20 years earlier, my entire career would have been different. And I definitely would have never burned out, but I also would have just enjoyed the journey so much more. And so I was like, okay, this is it. 56% of women leave tech by mid-career. This is something we can do to change that statistic, that we're in complete control of, that we don't have to rely on anyone else to change our experience of our jobs. And fewer women who don't want to leave, but who are like me, who just feel like this just isn't for me anymore. They don't have to walk away because we spend a lot of time, right? And the salaries are generally pretty comfortable. And so we all want to stay in these careers that we've invested time in building. And if you do want to stay and you feel like you can't, coaching it changed my life for sure. Okay, so before we dive in, a few housekeeping things. On the 11th of October, we're doing how to find, what are we calling it now, Amy? Amy changes the names. She's calling it Overcome Burnout and Reignite Your Fire. So that we're going to do on the 11th. So if this is something you feel like you need help with, if you feel like I'm not at burnout yet, but I can see myself on the path, or you just want some easy tips and tricks on how to feel more recharged more often, definitely sign up for that one. Amy will, for those of you who are live with us on the Zoom, Amy can drop that link for next month's masterclass. And I love a lively chat. So I see some new folks here this week. So you might not know that already, but I love a lively chat. So if anything resonates with you, drop that in here. Just let me know what you're thinking, what's coming up. I love to make this interactive. If you're like, what is she even talking about? Like, that's a great question because I would love to dig into it more. And for the folks that are on the live stream right now and you want to come join us for networking, in about 25 minutes, you should hop off there and go to wherever that link is and come join us on the Zoom because that's going to be super, super fun. All right, perfect. We're good. All right, so question one, let's dive in. All right, so question one is, I was previously denied for a raise or promotion due to budget issues. How do I know when to ask again? So here's the first thing I'll say. And if I was coaching the person who asked this question live, I would be like, you do know when to ask again. You don't like the answer. And so you're telling yourself you don't know. Like a lot of times when our brain is telling us, I don't know when to do this, like we do know, we just don't like the answer because the answer might be ask again now. And then you're going to feel really uncomfortable and you don't want to go do that. And so instead your brain's like, I don't know when the right time is, right? So this is one thing that can be going on here. Maybe it's not. Maybe this is like there's a legitimate further. And so we're going to break down though, like what's happening, like why we don't want to ask. So knowing when to ask again, I want to do kind of, outside of the set of mindset work, like when we're having a promotion or raise discussion with our boss, we want to make sure that we know when to ask again, right? That we found out in that meeting. So if you're thinking about having one of these meetings, right? Like the things you want to walk away with are what specific things do I need to do to get this promotion or raise, right? If you're told no at the time, how will we measure and know that I've done them, right? Like very clear things you can point to say yes, right? Like if it's all squishy, then you're going to come back and they're going to be like, oh no, that's not quite what I meant, right? So like, don't be afraid to ask for real, true specifics that you can both point to and go, yes, I finished that project or I learned this skill or whatever. And then once I've done them, what can I expect? Right. So you might think, oh, this will get me to the next thing. And they're like, no, this will just get you a small pay bump at your current level. Right. So make sure that you understand, like, if I do these things, these very specific things that we both can agree that are done, and then what will I get when I do them? Right. And then when should we circle back and have this discussion again? What's our next touch point? So make sure that when you're having these conversations, you're getting those pieces out. So let's assume we forgot to do that part, right? Like where we're like kind of freaked out in the meeting or like, okay, we got told no, right? And you sort of got a thing. And so now you're like, when do I really ask? So a couple of things are going on in our nervous system when this happens. So one is a freeze response, and it's self-doubt that's triggered by fear of disappointment, right? We're not sure when we want to do it because we actually don't want to. We're actually worried and have anxiety around feeling disappointed or feeling regret if we don't get the answer that we want. We also might be going into a flight response where we're jumping into perfectionism and we're trying to avoid doing it wrong. So we think if we do all of these things, then there's no way that I can go into this meeting and be disappointed by the answer, right? Because we're still operating off of that fear. Or we can go into a fight response where we're shoulding, coulding, and woulding all over ourselves, or we're worried that we're going to should, could, and would all over ourselves, right? The woulda triplets, shoulda, coulda, and woulda. We're worried that they're going to come in if we do ask and be like, you shouldn't have even asked. If only you would have like thought about this more, you could have done more to set yourself up, right? And we're so worried about all of the shame and humiliation that we're going to create with our thoughts when we get in there. So this is triggered oftentimes by our socialization, particularly as women, but also in other marginalized identities that we live within. So if women are validated and praised for our caretaking activities, right, and we feel responsible for tending to other people's comforts, then of course we're going to feel some amount of like, there might be something coming up with like, oh, well, I don't want my boss to be mad at me, right? As if we can actually control other people's feelings, but we're taught as women that we're not only that we can somehow impact other people and how they feel about a situation, but that it is actually our responsibility. So that can be part of what's at play here. And then, if we're doubting ourselves, like that's by design, right? We're not trained to look inward for the answer. Am I worthy? Am I valuable? Am I doing enough? Right? We're looking to other people to validate that. So the idea that we're going to make ourselves vulnerable and go and ask for this particular type of validation in the form of a raise or a promotion, and we're not going to get it, then we're going to feel crushed, right? And the UDA triplets come in. And so the feelings that are going to come up, right? The emotions that you're going to have when you're thinking about this are self-doubt and indecision, right? When you feel like you need to know all the steps, I need to know when I should do this, how I should do this, right? Perfectionism is going to come in. I want to do it right. And then the anxiety, that's sort of the counterpart of that, that I'm going to do it wrong. I'm going to ask at the wrong time. I'm going to make them mad, right? The anxiety of overstepping or of being too confident, thinking too highly of ourselves, right? Have I even earned this, right? And so, but the most prevalent thing when we're talking about this particular situation is the fear of how it's going to feel if we don't do it right. Right. But the thing is, and this is the thing that will set you free, is understanding that you can have your own back no matter what happens. You can go ask for the raise. You can get told no. It can seem like your boss is mad at you about it. Right. They could even tell you this was the wrong time to ask. I can't even believe you're here. Right. All of that is the situation. But what makes it awful is inviting in the UDA triplets, all of the humiliation and shame and everything else. So if we can agree up front, I'm going to go in, I'm going to ask for this. And then if I don't get it, I'm going to get the information that I need so that I can get it in the future, without making it mean that we did anything wrong, we didn't do it perfectly right, that we didn't earn it. Like all of these things that we're going to tell ourselves down the line, we can just agree now to have our own back no matter what. No matter what, I'm not going to should, could, and would all over myself. I'm just going to get some information and then I'm going to move forward, right? But I'm not going to make it mean I have to leave this company. This boss doesn't support me. I'm not going to make it mean any of those things that are going to make a situation that's not great, right? If you don't get the outcome that you want. I'm not going to make that mean anything about me, my ability, or my future, or my contributions that I've made to date. I'm not going to add any additional meaning to it, right? And then it makes it a little bit easier to go in and have this conversation. So, of course, we feel like if we're worried about, oh, I get it. Amy just sent a Slack and I was like, why are you sending that to me right now? But I know what she's doing. Sorry, Amy. All right. So, of course, we are worried that we're doing it wrong, right? Self-doubt is by design. Us going and trying to get our validation cookies everywhere else, that is by design. Of course, we're worried that we're going to misstep and we feel responsible for other people's feelings if we don't get our validation cookies when we do it wrong, right? But we can have our own backs. We cannot make it worse. We cannot should, could, and would all over ourselves. And of course, we beat ourselves up when we don't do it perfectly. Of course we do, because if we don't do it perfectly, then we don't get that validation that we so need to tell us that we're doing it right and that we're on the right track, right? So what happens when all of this, like these completely predictable outcomes happen? So we'll continuously search for the right answer instead of moving forward. And we stay stuck at the starting line. What happens when we think we need to know everything that's going to possibly happen in this meeting? Then we have to know every step before we can take one step. And going and asking for a raise or promotion imperfectly is so much better than not asking at all, right? Even if we just get a little bit of information, even if we're like, hey, I wasn't really expecting the conversation to go this way. Can we bring that, I need to do a little bit more. And can we talk about this again in 2 weeks, right? Whatever's going to happen, like having that conversation messy and imperfect is so much better than not having the conversation at all. So And then looking for the right time, right? Our brain thinks that this is danger, that if we feel any amount of psychological discomfort, that we're actually in physical mortal peril. It floods our bodies with the same adrenaline and cortisol as if we were about to be chased by a lion. Right. But it's just we're uncomfortable. So your brain is going to go find evidence that this isn't the right time. Like, oh, well, there was a hiring freeze. We lost that head count. There were layoffs somewhere else or even in our department, right? Like all of these things. We'll look for these reasons because our brain is like, it will be dangerous if you go ask because you're going to feel uncomfortable doing it. But you are not in mortal peril. The only thing you're risking is not getting a raise or a promotion because you're not putting your hat in the ring. You're not raising your hand. You're not getting the information that you need so that you can start building the skills or demonstrating whatever it is that you need to do to actually get it in the future. Because if you don't ask, you're not going to get that information. And then when you ask again in 6 months or whenever, when you think it's the right time, like you're going to have lost all of that because you're going to go in 6 months and they might be like, hey, I just really need you to do this thing. And then it's another 6 months down the line. So just think about doing it very imperfectly and give yourself permission to do this. And then the final thing is that your manager's job includes career development and retention. Like that's part of their job. And so you are not being inconvenient when you're asking them to do part of their job. I think sometimes we can get lost and just think managers are here to like set strategy and assign workloads and get a project off the finish line, but they're not. They're there for actually managing human beings and their careers. So don't forget that part when your brain's giving you all of these danger signals of why you shouldn't go ask. So here are my tips. So one, I want you to remember that if you don't prioritize your career, like no one else is going to do it for you. Like we get really caught up in this idea that if I put my head down and I work really hard, someone will notice and I will be rewarded. And it's just not how it works. Like hardly ever, right? You have to be in the driver's seat of your own career and not expecting that someone else is going to get you where you want to go. If you're in like the passenger seat or the back seat or whatever, you've got to be in the driver's seat. And that doesn't mean you have to know where you're going. You just have to know the next step and be heading towards it. We want to cancel the UDA triplets, right? The shouldas, the couldas, and the wouldas. We want to make it safe to do something like this. The thing that we are most afraid of, we're slightly afraid of the discomfort of the meeting, but we're terrified of how crappy we're going to be to ourselves if it doesn't go the way that we want. And so we really just want to agree in advance not to judge ourselves, not to should, could, and would all over ourselves, no matter what the outcome is. And that there's a concept, I don't talk about it very often on here, but that life is 50-50, that it's 50% positive and 50% negative emotions. And if you can lean into that and just be like, oh, this is the part where I feel uncomfortable. This is the part where I feel vulnerable. This is the part where I feel a little bit anxious. This is the part, right? And it's just part of the 50-50. And we just say, oh, sometimes I'm not going to feel the positive emotions. In fact, 50% of the time I'm not. And this is just part of life's experience. Like that can really sort of open up a world for you because a lot of times we're like trying to feel happy or good all the time. And it's just simply not how life works. And so just sort of understanding life as 50-50 at the baseline is also super helpful in this situation. This is the part where I have to be a little bit uncomfortable to get the thing that I want. The discomfort is the currency of your dreams, right? And then the last thing, and Amy, I didn't warn you about this. I'm sorry. She'll drop it in the chat in a second, but I have a workbook called How to Navigate High Stakes Interactions Like a Boss. And this, if you're thinking about doing one of these, and if you're watching this on the replay and you're not, oh, wow, that was fast. Amy's on it. She's like, I saw it coming. So if you want to download that, and if you're watching, on the live stream of the replay, just go to unboundedandunbothered.com and it's under free guides or something in the top nav up there. So, but this will take you like, Amy's laughing. This will take you step by step of how to like plan this meeting so that you have a plan going in. And I promise you, if you have a plan going in of an outcome that you can control, like you're going to walk out feeling like yes, I owned that. I did exactly what I wanted to do. Even if I didn't get the outcome that I was hoping for, it will still be a success. And that's the thing that I want most for you. Okay. Question 2. Why can't I speak up unless I'm 100% sure I have the right answer? Right? So we're going to break it down. Here's how our socialization hits our nervous system. Here's what happens, right? So what's happening in this is in that moment where we're thinking about speaking up, but we feel like we have to have the right answer, right? We're just stuck in self-doubt. It's a freeze response. Like, and actually when our nervous system is triggered, like there's less blood in our brain. It's gone to our limbs because it, it's designed for us to like run from the lion or whatever. And so there's actually less blood in our brain once our nervous system is activated. And then there's the flight response, right? Of the anxiety and the fear. And we're trying to avoid the fear of giving the wrong answer. And so we're in a bit of a flight response. And then there's a fight response. And that's what we're afraid of, kind of what we were talking about in the last one, right? If you don't have the 100% right answer, you're afraid of how you're going to should, could, and would. You're going to invite in those OODA triplets, shoulda, coulda, and woulda, and start beating the crap out of yourself if something you say isn't 100% right. Like we're afraid of ourselves in these situations. And the key to it is to have our own backs, no matter what, not to should, could, and would on ourselves, to speak to us the way our best friend will speak to us and be like, no, you did everything you should have done. It's not a big deal. Don't beat yourself up about this. Look at all these great things that you did, right? But we don't do that in our own head, right? We should, like, you should have done this. If only you could have done that. If you would have done this, it would have been totally different, right? And we just create. And the feelings, those feelings are shame and humiliation and regret. And those are things like no bad bitch ever took over the world with those feelings, right? Like you cannot rule the world from a place of shame. So what's going on with our socialization? So part of it is this perfectionist idea, right? Like you start seeing these things in boy and girl social groups, like young boys are allowed by parents to kind of be messy and to screw things up and to learn, where girls were like, parents will like swoop in and be like, no, don't, whatever, right? And there's like this really subtle, unintentional way that we're socializing from a very young age that you have to be perfect, right? We have this idea that I have to be a good this and a good this and a good this. And that makes sense if our validation comes from other people, right? Then of course we want to do all the things right so that we get the praise and validation that makes us feel like we have value. And the key that I talk about all the time and what we really work on in mindset work and thought work very deeply is looking inward for the answers. Am I valuable? Am I worthy? Am I doing this right? Am I enough? Right? And we can, once we can answer those for ourselves, we're free. We are absolutely free. There's nothing we can't do. Okay, so, and then we also have, as socialization, cooperation in girl social groups over competition. And we don't build emotional resilience. Like in boy social groups, starting around the age of 4 or 5, there's an alpha, there's competition. And they get very used to failing in a way that girls, because cooperation over competition, we don't build that emotional resilience. Doesn't mean we can't learn it. It just means that we didn't get that from a very young age. Like we often as women look at men and we're like, how does he just shake that off? I don't understand. Like why, how does this not like, you just failed massively, Chad. Like, how are you not like, ground down in your soul with like shame and humiliation and embarrassment, right? And Chad's like, whatever. I tried a thing, it didn't work, right? And this is a skill that we can build. I'll give you a tip on how to do this towards the end. And then particularly when we're talking about self-doubt, we really need to think about patriarchy and capitalism had a baby and it's named self-doubt, right? You get self-care that looks like tending to your appearance, right? And you get self-help that always tells you that you're doing it wrong, or if you just buy this product, if you take this class, if you read this book, if you do, if you buy this cream or this particular type of makeup, or you put this filter on your camera, like whatever it is, right? But there's always something that we can buy to fix the thing that we're doubting about ourselves, because our self-doubt is so, so, so profoundly profitable. So self-doubt is just part of the recipe for like many, many industries, but like you need to think about like who profits when I doubt myself, and like be very, very aware of that, right? Like the gender pay gap, and particularly when you add in like, additional racial identities, right? That pay gap is by design, right? So just keep in mind these sorts of things, particularly like when we're talking about the last question, like how does it benefit you, or who benefits when you don't ask for a raise, right? Okay, so what are the feelings that are going on when we're thinking I have to have the right answer, right? So self-doubt, we just talked about quite a bit, like what will happen if I say the wrong thing. Fear is part of it, because we're afraid we're going to be embarrassed, and then later we're going to should, could, and would all of ourselves and feel shame. We also have this, imposter syndrome of being exposed as a fraud. Like everyone's going to see, I have no idea what I'm doing. I've coached hundreds of women at this point. I promise you, we all think that, literally all of us. Like it's not imposter syndrome, it's patriarchy disease. It's by design. It is very profitable for us to be so in our heads and doubting ourselves, rather than being free in the world to create the change that we need, right? And then there's that additional shame layer that's on top of everything else, right? Of the shouldas, the couldas, the wouldas. So when we think about like when these things come together, our socialization and our nervous system, right? Of course, we doubt ourselves, because that's by design. When we're bombarded with like incessant messages of our not enoughness, right? Of course, we feel like we can't make a misstep in a male-dominated industry where our mistakes are seen as character flaws, whereas someone else's mistake that's living in a majority identity, right? Those are looked at as character building, right? And so of course we're going to feel this fear of like, I can't screw this up, particularly if you're the only or you're the first at any particular table. The stakes are going to feel even higher, because you feel like I can't screw this up for the people coming after me either, right? And of course, we have perfectionist tendencies when we've been conditioned our entire lives to be good girls, right? Of course we do. All of that makes sense. So what happens though, is this leads to kind of predictable outcomes, right? We will be so worried about having the right answer that we have no answer, and we don't get to contribute anything. And we deprive the world of our ideas when we do that, right? And we don't get to demonstrate our skill of our 90% correct answer, or our 70% correct answer, or our 20% correct answer that someone else can come in and build on top of. And then you have this brilliant new thing, right? We miss out on that collaboration layer. Like I have a client who went from like feeling like she had to have everything perfect. She was the only female leader that would be in these, executive leadership meetings. She felt like she had to have everything. And once she started just throwing out ideas and being okay if they didn't go anywhere, or that there would still be a little bit more work to do, like she got promoted within 6 months, because she stopped depriving everyone of her brilliant ideas, because she felt like she had to do so much legwork up front. And then the thing that's the worst about this, of like staying silent and not contributing our ideas, is that we don't get to learn and grow, because we're not collaborating, because we're trying to get it all done up front and make it perfect. We get to work on fewer things. Like we're really limiting our own growth and potential by being afraid of these things. So what do we try? So I promised earlier a tip to build emotional resilience. And I think this is the one that's the very most, is just to get used to having your body flooded with adrenaline and cortisol in relatively low stakes environments. So we call this the dare of the day. So every day you do something that scares you. That's like low stakes. Like you're gonna ride the elevator or escalator backwards. You're going to ask for your coffee for free. You're going to ask a stranger on the street for $1, or you're going to stop someone like in the grocery store and just give them this outrageous compliment, right? Something that feels super, super scary that will help you start building that sort of emotional resilience, because then you get used to feeling that way more often, and also understanding like, wow, I can do like way more things than I thought I could. I can use my voice in ways I didn't realize, right? And you're building some trust with yourself also. And so you want to do these things every single day and work on it, because then when you go into these meetings and you get a little bit nervous about not having it all figured out yet, right? You can still speak up. You can still get your ideas out there. You can still contribute, and you can still learn and grow. And so it's really, really important. This is just a simple thing that you can do. It might seem totally dumb, but I promise you, like, it is really, like, I have one client who like really took this seriously and has absolutely changed her entire relationship with herself and with her job, and is able to really, like, she wouldn't even comment in like Slack channels and things at the beginning. And now she's so self-assured in her role that she's speaking at all hands meetings and stuff, things that she didn't even think she would ever really want to do, or that didn't feel possible for her. So that was question 2.